Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to The Rundown, Episode 10, my sometimes weekly podcast where I talk about all things video games, anime, and including, but not limited to, general pop culture news as a whole. Today is January 18th, 2025, one day before the great banning of TikTok here in the States. Whether or not that's still going to go through remains to be seen, but it's looking pretty likely. Perhaps I'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll see how things go. But as always, do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you're watching this on your respective podcast listening platforms. Whether you're watching it on here on Twitch or you're watching it on YouTube, especially if you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, as it does help get this particular video in the algorithm to reach more people on YouTube, especially. I don't have this thing on any podcast source like Spotify. Yeah, Spotify or iTunes or whatever that might be. Perhaps in the future, if there's any requests for that, I might move it there as well. For those that want to, listen to the podcast on the go in a more convenient manner, but we'll see how that goes. As always, I'm your host, Corrupt Ronan. Thank you all for joining me today, as per usual. So for today's show, we got quite a doozy in terms of news topics. I shouldn't say some, many controversial, and others not so much. But as I'm going through my show notes here, which I have a lot of interesting topics on, I'm not even sure if I'll have enough time to get to all of them today, because I usually try to keep these podcasts relatively condensed to about an hour. But if things keep going the way they've been going, I might extend that to an increased time. But we'll see how this episode goes in the near future. But on that note, let's introduce the topics that we will be talking about today that I do have time for, without a doubt. And the first topic, well, I should say topic summary. The first topic of this summary was going to be about, obviously, the news that broke, I want to say a day or two ago, about the Dragon Age Veilguard director, that is Corrine Busch, quitting the company. And there's a lot of details surrounding that, including potential theft of leaks that happened over the past day or so that occurred over this incident as well, that I'll talk about. As my voice goes into a higher inflection, I should probably bring that down. We'll also talk about the reveal of the Switch 2 that happened. While the reveal was obviously very brief, there's still some interesting details about that showcase, that brief showcase, that I want to call out some information about as well. And then there's also the discussion that came around the idea of normalcy returning to video games and what that means. We'll get into that when I get to that topic, but it does involve the developer of the recent Lords of the Fallen game taking to Twitter to ask a few questions to the general gaming public. We'll get to that a bit later as well. And then there's also this idea that I kind of wanted to opine about in regards to this idea of us, quote unquote, winning against the, how do I say this? It's no other way to say it. I guess you could say the woke crowd, they like to call it. The politically correct, or the woke crowd that's been going around lately. And this idea of us winning, and how, in my opinion, I think we might be too quick to jump to that idea off of the few wins that we've had so far. But again, I'll get into that a bit later as well. I got a bunch of other topics, and perhaps I'll get to those if I have time to. But as of right now, those are the main ones that I'll be covering for this episode for sure. But without further ado, let's get into it, folks. Let's talk about that Dragon Age news. So, about a day or two ago, there was a leak that happened on Twitter, also known as X for those of you that, want to get technical about the whole terminology of the whole thing. But news broke that the director of Dragon Age The Veilguard, that is Corrine Busch, she basically left the company. And an email had leaked that was sent to the employees from an insider at the company, showcasing the fact that this had happened. This was caught by, I believe, Grums on X and was passed around, and then was sent to another content creator by the name of Smash JT, who also has sources within the company, to which he then tried to verify if the email was legit with his source, and come to find out that indeed the email was in fact legit. Now, as far as I know, from what I've seen so far, is that both Grums and Smash JT were the only ones who broke this news first. Why is that important? I'll get into that a little bit later. But let's talk about the email first. And I'll show that to you guys right about now. So in the email that was shown at a full screen, hold on. Oh, wrong one. Hold on. Doing it live. There we go. All right. So in this email, And they also have the image of the email itself down below, but I'll read the transcript, I guess you could call it. Corrine says, hard to believe I'm writing these words, but here it goes. It's time for me to say goodbye. Today is my last day at Bioware and EA. After so much contemplation, I've decided to pursue a new challenge and a new project, doing what I love most, making RPGs. Now, what I found to be a great response to this particular section of this email is, if you like making RPGs, why did you leave the company that specializes in doing just that? Important question, but we'll continue. It wasn't an easy decision. I meant it when I said I love BioWare, the Dragon Age team, and what we all accomplished together. My time with all of you has been the highlight of my career. I want to offer my personal thanks to each of you for your trust, your companionship, and for the many ways in which you've inspired me and helped me grow. I'll be eagerly waiting to see what great experiences you create next, and as a fan, I'll be rooting for you. If I leave you with any advice, it is this. We all know making games is hard. It's part of why we do it. But making games is also about the people and the reliance we have on one another. So take the time to celebrate the wins and lift each other up. The challenge and the work will always be there, but the moments we have with each other are precious and few. Let's stay in touch. Corrine. So, a lot of people kind of speculated on this, and I think perhaps the most pertinent one that stood out to me is the idea of, when you look at the overall quote-unquote success of Dragon Age, the Veilguard, based on EA's internal metrics of what they anticipated or projected the game to sell, it fell short of all of that by a landslide. EA had projected that game to sell roughly 10 million copies. And while there hasn't been any real confirmation or solid evidence or solid numbers about the game's overall sales, the numbers that have been thrown around by insider sources at BioWare and EA is that Dragon Age the Veilguard sold just shy of 1.5 million copies as a whole. Now, I imagine that number has probably increased a bit since then, because that news broke out, I want to say maybe a month or two ago, probably, I think it was back in December or November when the news broke out about how many copies it sold. But if you look at that over the course of the months that it was out, that is a very, very slow trajectory for sales as a whole. And 10 million copies is astronomical, and most games can barely even achieve that. You look at a game like Black Myth Wukong, that game at the time, up to this point, so far that we know, sold roughly 20 million copies, and let's say a handful of months. But even then, that took some time for them to get there. On top of the fact that that game was mostly meant to appeal to the Chinese audience, which of course it was going to sell quite well in that regard. And then, you take into the account that all the drama that happened around that game and the controversy, so on and so forth, which I also think kind of helped boost that game's sales to begin with. But for a game that was, quote unquote, designed for the modern audience, you would think that if the modern audience was indeed a thing, it would have sold a lot more copies than the 1.5 million, alleged 1.5 million that it sold. So in terms of EA's internal metrics about what Dragon Age should have sold, it obviously fell shy of this mark by quite a bit. So the whole idea here, and why the suspicions float around this email, is the fact that people believe that Corrine didn't leave of their own accord. They left because, and this is alleged that people are suspecting, is that more than likely there was someone at EA that pulled Corrine aside and said, listen, either you can leave of your own accord and you can set the narrative of how you're parting ways with the company, or we can fire you. And as you can see, we know which one they took if that happens to be the case. There's a bit more news that happened around this whole idea as well. This, by the way, this article comes from smashjt.com. This is his website. So if you want to, read the article in its entirety, you can head over there. And I'll have a link to that in the description of this podcast, of course, for those who want to see the whole thing by itself. But following this news is the potential idea, the rumor, if you will, that in lieu of this whole idea of Corrine leaving the studio, is that BioWare, the Edmonton studio, is also at risk of being shut down. And the rumor has it is that the announcement of its shutdown will probably be happening sometime next month. Again, this is a rumor, so take it with a grain or massive grains of salt. And I'll talk about why there's a bit of controversy surrounding this whole rumor in the first place and look when I get to the whole leak stealing part of this particular news. But I would not be surprised about the whole idea. And as you can see here, this part of the article talks about the rumors of the Edmonton studios closure. It says confirmed that the email originally sent to me regarding Busch's departure was legit. I contacted my insider, and sure enough, it's true. But it's not the only problem happening over at BioWare these days. A follow-up email from my source within EA adds serious fuel to this ongoing fire. According to the source, BioWare Edmonton, the studio's flagship location, that is the original location of BioWare as a whole, is now rumored to be on the chopping block next by EA. The studio opened its 3-story office just 5 years ago, and it's already on the way out. By the looks of it, the closure is allegedly set to be announced. Allegedly, keep in mind, allegedly set to be announced around February 2025. That's next month, just before Electronic Arts' quarterly town hall meeting, which they do that around the end of their fiscal year to announce, the changes that are going on at the company. And this would fit right along the lines of when talking to investors wanting to effectively continue to gain their trust and their money, so to speak, is by showing them the changes you made in the company. And if they have to fire people or shut studios down, that would be a great way to show investors that you are indeed taking this seriously in regards to making changes within the company that not only benefits the consumer, but more importantly, benefits the investors as a whole. So again, this is a rumor, so take it with many grains of salt. Don't know what's happening, but there's a additional wrinkle to this whole thing that I'll get into for sure. So that's currently what's going on right now. The question might be that assume this does happen. What happens to games like the upcoming the upcoming Mass Effect that they're working on currently? It's kind of in the air right now, because the Edmonton studio is obviously not the only studio that BioWare has. They also have a studio in Austin, Texas. And if anything, I suspect that most of the development for Mass Effect will probably be moved there. I don't think they'll end up canceling the project outright. I could be wrong. This is speculation on my part. I don't think they'll outright cancel the project, but I imagine if they continue to go forward with it and move it over to the Austin, Texas studio, I imagine a lot of the scope of what that game is going to be will end up changing because of this, because now they have a lot less staff to work with. Unless they intend to move all that staff out of the Edmonton studio to Austin, Texas, which would, be a whole logistical nightmare by itself. But we'll see what happens. And again, that is assuming any of this news about the studio shutting down is true. So we'll see what happens. Again, this is all rumor, so take it with a grain of salt. This is all alleged. Alleged. Rumor. Okay? So now we get into the whole controversy part about the leaks themselves. So there's some internet drama that popped up shortly after this news came out, where roughly after this news broke, this is when the legacy media website started making claims to the news as well. And websites like your Eurogamers and the like had taken to giving credit to sources that were not the ones that broke the news first. So when they caught wind of the studio, they started, this news, I should say, when they caught wind of this news, they started breaking it as if inside that they had their own insiders, and that one Jeff Grubb of Giant Bomb was the first one to break the news in this regard. But based on what we've seen so far, it was not Jeff that broke the news first. And based off of his own tweets, is that Jeff on his own was already aware of this news breaking in the first place, or aware of the leaks to begin with, and then tried to say that his source tried to follow up with him and tried to dismay the rumor that the studios was shut down. But that also implies that the rumors about the studios shutting down were already in the air in the first place. And where would they have come from in the first place? It's the people that got the information first, which would be Grums and Smash JT. If you go to these websites and you read the news about this particular topic, they don't credit Grums or Smash JT whatsoever. They only credit Jeff Grubb as the one who broke the news first and gave him all the credit. Now, for me personally, I'm not surprised that they would do this, because the people like Smash JT or Grums, for example, they hate them. They hate them. They hate the people associated with them. They hate people like me that uses news from them, uses news from a Smash JT or a Grums and follows them because of the news that happens and because they have insider information and because they also push back on a lot of the bullshit that's been going on in video games as of late. So because of that, and because a lot of these particular websites and the people within them are all we'll say in cahoots with each other, so to speak, this whole nepotistic idea of all these studios being in one big club and you're not in it. So I'm not surprised that they wouldn't give credit to the people that broke the news first. But then that goes into the idea of this lack of journalistic integrity when you cannot put your personal feelings aside and give credit where credit is due, even to the people you don't like. Now, there was always this idea that I kept seeing floating around the internet, especially in the YouTube space and even the social media space, like Twitter, for example, where every now and then you would see posts of people saying that, listen, if you think you hate journalists, you don't hate games journalists enough. And for a while there, I'd always thought that was a bit extreme. But when I see things like this, where these media publications are willing to take news from people or steal news from people and run it as if it's their own and not give proper credit, I'm starting to lean more towards the side of, yeah, those people might actually be right. If you think you hate journalists, you don't hate them enough. And even worse is that as the news trickled down the grapevine into other access media websites on top of that, at a certain point, they even stopped giving credit to Jeff Grubb and start saying that it was Eurogamer who broke the news first. Like a game of telephone where the original intended message gets lost by the time it gets to the end. When the first Gamergate broke out, this record says, I was admit typing it out that sometimes it's also incompetence. Also true. Also true. But that just goes to show that any form of integrity when it comes to the journalists that work at these websites, it's completely gone. And when the first Gamergate broke out back in 2014, there was this whole talk about whether or not it was really about the ethics in journalism, or was it just a harassment campaign for people like Zoe Quinn and the likes and so on and so forth. If you want more news about the first Gamergate, I was going to say look it up. I was going to say, you want to know news about the truth about the first Gamergate, then to look it up. But then I remembered that as we've entered what is called Gamergate 2.0 that happened way back in March of last year, if you were to use a website like Wikipedia to get information on what Gamergate 1 was, you're not going to get the truth. As people have found that the only way you can get a unbiased, objective breakdown of what Gamergate 1.0 was, you have to go to the Chinese Wikipedia website to get that instead. Of all the places to give you an unbiased take on something, you have to go to Chinese Wikipedia to get an unbiased take. Because the Western take will tell you straight up that it was just a harassment campaign and it wasn't about ethics in journalism. But seeing what's happening here, where a lot of these websites can't even bring themselves to put their own personal feelings aside and give credit where credit is due, even to people that they don't particularly care for personally, you're not doing yourselves any favors, guys. It's not a good look. And even worse is that when people started calling Jeff out on the fact that he stole this news, he leaned into it. Started claiming that he was basically leaning into the whole heel aspect of, yeah, I'm the villain. That was me. I'm the one who did it. It's me. Now, I'm not going to say that Jeff Grubb doesn't have insiders in the industry. As a particular journalist and creator himself, he does. I firmly believe he does have insiders in the industry. There was a point in time where I used to watch a lot of his news because he was, in a lot of cases, he was indeed breaking news first in regards to a lot of topics. But seeing this and this behavior, let's just say there's a significant level of respect that I have lost for him as a whole. And Giant Bomb as a whole, although considering Giant Bomb these days is certainly not the Giant Bomb it was back in the days when I used to watch. It is the Ship of Theseus comparison. For those who don't know, look up the whole Ship of Theseus story, where, to put it simply, If you change everything out on the inside of the ship, is it still the same ship? And the answer was only in name, and that's it. Think Rocksteady and Suicide Squad. But anyways, those are that's the particular news about what's going on with Bioware, the director of Dragon Age and the Veil Guard, Inquisition, Dragon Age the Veil Guard, Dragon Age the Veil Guard, and the leaks in regards to this topic. Again, like, you don't necessarily have to like the individuals that break this news, but if you have any level of decency or integrity, then giving proper credit where credit is due goes a long fucking way. And if you can't put your feelings aside to do something like that, that says a lot more about you as a person. But all right, anyways, the Switch 2, let's talk about it. So, just a few days ago, Nintendo finally, formally, officially revealed the Switch 2 and the fact that it is indeed called the Switch 2. Now, as I said on Discord when this whole thing broke out, the leaks about this console, in my opinion, kind of took the wind out of the sails of this reveal. And if you look at the particular length of the reveal, let me go back to this real quick and swap this over. If you look at the length of the trailer for said reveal, as the video itself is around 2 minutes and 21 or 22 seconds long. Make sure the volume's muted for this. Here we go. It was very clear that Nintendo just cobbled this thing together to get it out the door and show people the damn thing ahead of time, officially. To say, yes, here's the Switch 2. We're working on it. This is what it looks like. Here's what you can expect. And so far, like, you know, everything I'm seeing here, not all that impressed with. It looks like a bigger Switch, which is totally fine. If you're going to call a console the Switch 2, obviously you're going to make it look somewhat similar to the previous iteration with a bunch of improvements, of course. So the thing that I found particularly interesting, though, is not just the kickstand, though. But the animation, though, I know somebody had to do that. Somebody had to put that together. The rumor was, before all this happened, was that Nintendo would potentially show the console off this month, and then that they might have it out sometime in March of this year. But based off of the end of this particular reveal, the March release date was obviously not the case, as at the end of this thing, they said that they'll have more details about the console in April of this year, which means that the console is not coming out in March, but sometime after that. If I had to guess, considering March is the end of the fiscal year for most companies, I could see this thing coming out sometime over the summer of this year. Which would be what, roughly the second quarter of 2025. So I could see that happening. But anyways, let's talk about details of this really brief reveal of the game, of the console itself. So before the whole reveal of the console itself, there are a bunch of leaks that people put out, especially about the internals of the console. And there was an image that popped up of the PCB, or the printed circuit board of the console itself, inside the tablet, I guess you could say. And one thing that people noted was that there was a USB-C port on the top of the console and at the bottom of the console. Now, the bottom of the console was already a case for the original Switch, because you would use that to dock the console into the docking station and then have that output video signal to the television, right? And it would outclock the console's internals to make sure that it could play games on the TV at a higher resolution, higher frame rate, so on and so forth. However, as you can see when they go into the details at the top of this reveal, as they show off the side aspect of it, but you can see at the top, there is a USB-C port at the top of the console as well, which would lend credence to the PCB that they showed to the console a few months back. Also, another thing to note as well is the cartridge port as well, which indicates that, yeah, they're still using cartridges, and they'll probably still be roughly the same size as the ones in the original Switch, which is totally fine. And then the kickstand. Now, I got just for a moment, let me rant about the kickstand, if you don't mind. So, when I first got my Switch, which was roughly a few months after the console launched, I got it. I didn't really have any games for it at the time, because I was just trying to make sure I got my hands on it before it sold out. But I got my hands on it. I set it up, and then I was like, oh, I kind of want to see what the whole thing looks like if you set it up on its own, the console on its own with the kickstand. So I do that, take it out. I open up the kickstand, and the kickstand just pops off the hinges just like that. And I was like, shit, did I break it? Oh, no. I broke the kickstand in the first hour owning the damn console. Now, I've heard a lot of stories about people that broke their kickstands very quickly because the kickstand itself is very flimsy for the original console. I'm pretty sure for the OLED model, they have a much broader kickstand that doesn't do that. But for the original console and the original models of the console, it was just this one little piece of plastic that you pull out from the back of the console that was very flimsy and very weak, and the hinges that it was on were not that great in the first place. So I snapped mine off immediately, which kind of pissed me off because I thought I broke it within the first hour of owning the damn thing. But come to find out, I didn't necessarily break the kickstand itself. It's just that it easily comes off the hinges. You can put it right back on. But for a lot of people, they just straight up broke the kickstand. And I can't blame them for being kind of upset about that. I can't blame them for being a little upset about breaking the kickstand. So hopefully, based on what this one is looking like, the kickstand is definitely, they put a lot more work in the idea of what this kickstand is this time around. And seeing how far it can bend in terms of getting the console out and having it stand on its own, or the tablet out to get it to stand on its own, definitely an improvement. They also showed that the new Joy-Cons are obviously bigger than the ones in the original Switch, of course. And I mean, in this case, they're showing off the black ones. I imagine, considering it's Nintendo, they'll have various different colors for this console as well. They're just showing off the signature blue and, I don't know, or blue and orange, blue and red, whatever you want to call this color, I guess. But what I also found particularly interesting is they show it here, is that they have the Joy-Cons effectively gliding over the table, kind of like a mouse, like a computer mouse. And there have been some leaks talking about how the Joy-Cons may have mouse-like functionality in them as well, where you can use them as an input, almost like a mouse. So the question is, what would you do at games with that particular idea? Fancy came in with the colors and called it peach. She hitting us with that artist education right now. I see you, Vancy. Dropping that knowledge on us. All right, well, what would you call the blue then, Vancy? What color is that then, smarty pants? Another thing that I found interesting as well is the way the Joy-Cons attach to the console. Now, you can see the connector on the inside, and there's a connector, the console itself, but you can also see the ports for connection on the inside of the Joy-Cons themselves. I can go back to it. Where is it at? Here we go. You can see that little port there in the middle there to connect the Joy-Cons to the console itself. But what I found interesting as well about the attachment to the console is that when they snap in, like, there's a kind of a jerking animation that snaps them in. Now, I don't think that's them just like practically shoving the Joy-Cons into the connectors on the console. There were some leaks that came out a while back talking about how the Joy-Cons might be magnetic this time. And considering the animation of how they attach to the console itself, it does make a lot of sense for them to be magnetic. Considering the animation and how they attach, it does make sense. I think that might be the better route to go this time around, considering the way the Joy-Cons connect to the console on the original one, which was the rails where you slide them in and out. The problem with that is that if you did that often, the rails and the sliders would become very loose, where they wouldn't stay in place on their own. And if gravity takes over when you're holding the console in your hand, there's a chance that the damn thing might slide out of your hand. The Joy-Cons slide out of the console falls in your lap or on the floor, whatever it might be. So that was a problem for a lot of people as well, especially if you attached and detached the Joy-Cons a lot. And I noticed that problem happening somewhat on mine when I put when I attached them to the Joy-Con controller itself, which I really hate that controller, which is why I bought a Pro controller, because I hate that controller. But I noticed that as well, is that over time, they were starting to get loose and they would start becoming detached on their own. So using a magnet system where they attach into the console itself and not on rails is probably a better way to go this time around. It's either calling it the Switch 2. And then they were showing off one of the games. I'm guessing this is looking like a new Mario Kart that has been rumored to be in development for quite some time. And people were calling out Donkey Kong in the back over here. Where's my cursor at? Where's my cursor at? I gotta show the cursor. Hold on. People were calling out. So can I get that pop up again? There we go. People were calling out the look of Donkey Kong in the back here. I don't know if you can see him. Can I zoom in on that? Let's see if I can zoom in on that. Let me get all the way up in that Donkey Kong real quick, folks. Hold on. Let me get all the way up in that Donkey Kong. You can kind of see him in the back behind Luigi, in the middle of Luigi and Toad, way in the back over there. Hold on, zoom one more time. People were calling him out, saying he looking a little thick back there. At least thicker than what you would expect out of Donkey Kong as a whole. Yeah, Mika's posted a picture of him, a much more clear picture of him on Discord already. But people were calling that out, saying he looking kind of thick back there. As if they changed the design of him a bit this time around. So yeah, this is looking like a new Mario Kart for the console. I can't imagine them not putting this out on the OG Switch as well. So this might be a cross-generation game for the console, which I would not be surprised about at all. Now, details about the internal specs of the console. There's been a lot of leaks about that, and I imagine Nintendo's probably saving that info for the Nintendo Direct they're having in April 2nd, to talk more about it. But considering that Nintendo has a continuing partnership with NVIDIA for their design of their consoles and the graphics hardware, I would not be surprised if they're using some form of AI upscaling, similar to that of DLSS or FSR or the PlayStation upscaling they're using for the Pro. I imagine you're going to see that being the future of consoles moving forward, is them using these AI upscalers going forward. That is where we're going into the future, is AI upscaling. So I can't see the Switch 2 being that much more powerful, or if it is as powerful as, let's say, a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. It should be close. I think overall the console should be close in terms of graphics processing power. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, because you reach that point of it becoming too expensive if you do that. And considering it's a tablet, you got to worry about things like heating and so on and so forth. So I would hope that it gets close. Some folks are saying that it might be up to like PS4 quality, which I think maybe is aiming a bit short of what you should expect. But it should get close to PS5 quality, if anything. But the AI upscaling thing might be their way of trying to say that, the console can output games up to 4K, even though it's not actually 4K, but them upscaling it to 4K with the AI tech. So don't be surprised if we start hearing stuff like that. If Nintendo Nintendo being Nintendo, I would expect that they'll probably use something similar to DLSS without actually using DLSS, because they don't want to be behoven to NVIDIA's licensing fees to that. So they probably have some proprietary tech developed in-house for AI upscaling tech that is based off of something like a DLSS, which is good overall. There was some news that broke a few days ago about people seeing that their pre-orders for Metroid Prime 4 had been canceled, but a lot of those pre-orders were pre-orders that they did way back in like 2017. So it's kind of hard to say whether or not that's them saying that they're canceling the Switch version of the game and sticking with the Switch 2 version of the game, or if they just canceled the pre-orders because the pre-orders are that old. It's hard to say, but there's some news floating around about that. So whether or not that version of the game has been canceled or not, we'll have to wait and see. There were a lot of people saying that the footage they showed of Metroid Prime 4 when they revealed it had to have been running on the Switch 2, which I disagreed with, because you could clearly see the image quality flaws in the game itself that indicated that the game was not running at a particularly high resolution. And those are typical limitations of what you would expect out of a Switch and out of Switch 2. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, a lot of the details surrounding the console's internals and how it handles, graphics and the like is still up in the air. A lot of rumors floating around, a lot of leaks floating around, but again, they're leaks, so take them with a grain of salt. Although, to be fair, most of the leaks about the Switch 2 have proven to be true, including what the console looked like. So, your mileage may vary when it comes to these leaks. But either way, that's kind of what's going on right now. Raiku says, Nintendo created NDLSS. It adds 8 frames for every one. Got to keep it with the competition. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they had some kind of like frame generation equivalent in this bad boy, which would, frame generation is kind of a controversial thing, especially now when you look at what NVIDIA is doing with the 50 series cards, with the whole like multi-frame generation thing that it's, people are not too happy about, because it feels like they're just justifying the cost or the price of these new GPUs with just supplementing it with the fake frames, they call them, to increase frame rate. There were some benchmarks that came out recently about about a few 50 series cards in regards to their 40 series iterations, and at least in the case of the 4080 versus the 5080, the performance gains not that significant. Not that significant. We're talking 15% increase. That ain't a whole lot. But we'll see when the real benchmarks come out about that. But if those are any indication, it's like, yeah, I'm not in a rush to buy this new generation of GPUs. Let's put it that way. Anyways, that's a tangent. Back on the Switch. Switch 2, it's been revealed. We all knew it was coming. We were just waiting for Nintendo to stop being dorks about it and actually officially reveal the damn thing. More details coming out in April, so we'll see how it goes. Again, rumors said that it might be coming out in March, proven to not be true. Looking like a summer thing, if anything. So stay tuned for that. Like, I'm interested. Like, Nintendo hasn't let me down in terms of the games on their consoles, which is kind of the reason why I would buy a Switch 2 to begin with. So I'll end up buying this at some point when it comes out. Maybe not on launch, because I made the mistake of doing that around launch and didn't have anything to play. So I might just wait a little while. But I do intend to get one. Anyways, what are your thoughts on the Switch 2? Are you getting one? Are you not getting one? Feel free to let me know in the comments below if you're watching this in the VOD version or the archive version on YouTube. Mika says, getting. She wants it. She wants it on her TV right now in her hands. She wants to play the chunky Donkey Kong that she saw. She loves him. The thick boy. Like, especially since all the emulators keep getting shut down. Yeah, there's a lot of them that got shut down recently. Actually, I was having a conversation about this with my cousin over Christmas break, in fact. We were talking about it, like the topic kind of came up because he was thinking about buying either a Asus ROG Ally or a Steam Deck, and he was kind of debating whether or not he should get one. We kind of talked about that for a bit, but then the topic of the Switch 2 came up. We were talking about that as well and whether or not we would get one of those. And yeah, we both decided that we would totally get one for sure when it comes out. Anyways, moving on to talking about this whole normalcy in the industry thing. Mika says, if Fiasco's going to destroy Mario Kart, I'm going to destroy all of you in Mario Kart. Do I have to bring back multiplayer Mario Kart weekends? Do I have to bring that back? Don't make me. I'll do it. I'll bring it back. I'll destroy all of you at Mario Kart 9 or whatever. It's probably Mario Kart 9. They're probably going to call it that. Anyways, on to the topic of normalcy in video games. Now, the reason I added this news and called it the topic that it is because recently, for anybody who's been kind of following I try not to make these podcasts political, but obviously politics kind of bleeds into it a little bit. If you've been following some of the things that have happened since the election in terms of changes throughout entertainment that have slowly been bubbling to the surface since then, the idea of things returning to normal has been a topic of discussion that has popped up as of late. And people kind of pushing back on a lot of the quote unquote woke shit in video games, especially. But this kind of came up and this discussion sort of popped up because the developer of the Lords of the Fallen, the reboot Lords of the Fallen series, the CEO of the company has been on social media asking gamers a very general question about specific topics. Let me just go ahead and pull that up on the screen for you just a second here. So he took to Twitter. I think his name is Marek Tymiński. If I'm butchering that, I apologize. I think they're a Polish studio. Not entirely sure. I think they're a Polish studio. But anyways. So they asked an important question. They asked a series of questions, in fact. This first question I'm going to pull up on screen is what they asked a few days ago on the 12th. And they put up a poll. So that question is, in a medieval fantasy action RPG experience, what do you prefer to choose between? We will follow the final result. First one was body type A, body type B, male or female, or none of the above. I'm pretty sure the general audience gave a resounding put male and female back into the video games and knock it off with the body type A and B bullshit. Now, Mika says it's Polish. Okay, I was right. Thank you, Mika. So there's kind of been a whole running debate about the whole body type A and B thing in video games because there has been an increase of that as of late. I've played games like Elden Ring that had body type A and B, Dragon's Dogma 2 that had A and B. I believe Power World has body types A and B. And in my opinion, the way I looked at it, I thought it was kind of ridiculous for that. Because at the end of the day, people are going to pick the one that closely identifies to what they look like on the inside. And the need to change that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Now, from what I understand, from what I've heard, is that the reason why they changed that in the first place was to appeal to the trans crowd so that they wouldn't feel excluded by having to pick one of the two. But again, that comes into the process of trying to appeal to a very small minority. And with the level of pushback that has been happening as of late in terms of, again, quote unquote, wokeness in video games, to see that, it kind of turns a lot of people off, especially now. There was the article, the news that broke out about a few months back for the Dragon Quest remake that came out, where the video from a showcase in Japan happened with the creator of Dragon Quest talking about how they had to include body types A and B in the game instead of male and female. Now, a good friend of mine, Rio, he saw that video and and the translations that were there, and he said that the translations were not entirely accurate. So he gave me a set of new translations that were more accurate to what they were saying in the video. And from what I read, based off of these translations, the intent or the overall feeling of the conversation was different, but the general premise of what they were saying was pretty much the same. And the idea was that they were just confused about why they had to do this. Not that they particularly hated it, but that they were confused about why they had to do this. And for most people, I can imagine that sentiment rings true for a lot of people. It's just general confusion about why this is and why it exists in the first place. And based on the results of this poll, people prefer to just being called male and female. So whether or not they stay true to this in the future remains to be seen. People have kind of given their own takes on it in the comments below. People say that they kind of hate the body type A and B thing to just go back to male and female. The whole debate of whether or not there's only two genders, so on and so forth. But then you had the people that always do the same. I would say the very weak argument of, oh, it's not that important. Why do you care? No one should care. It shouldn't matter. To which I then ask, if it wasn't that important, then why did you change it in the first place? If it wasn't that important, then why do you feel the need to comment that you don't care that nobody else should? If it's not that big of a deal and it's not that important, then why change it? For a lot of people, it is a big deal. And as you can see, based off of this poll, for a lot of people, it is in fact a big deal. Now, I do take issue with social media polls as metrics because, as you can see, it's a total of 49,000 votes that voted on this poll, right? Now, that's still a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, but it's still based on the number of people that saw this poll and voted on it. And social media, that's where you tend to kind of fall into when it comes to stuff like that, is that you kind of fall into the audience that sees the poll and chooses to engage with said poll. And I would love to see these results again with a much larger audience. I imagine it won't be different. You'll likely still get the same results, but at least you'll have a bigger sample size, right? So that's kind of my issue with social media polls in general. But I imagine if we were to take it out of this and put it to a larger audience, the results wouldn't be any different. The reality is that people want things to go back to normal. You're seeing that. You're going to continue to see that over the next several years. You're going to see that people wanting things to go back to normal again. And you're seeing that now with stuff like this in game. And I mean, I applaud him for being able to come to people and say, hey, guys, instead of just making this decision on our own, We're going to ask you what you want instead. And I think that is the proper way to go about it as a developer and as a CEO of a company. When you're making your customers your first and foremost priority, because those are the people that are giving you money and keeping your studio afloat. So the sentiment here, the idea here is the right way to go. But then there was a follow-up to this. And I actually have another thing. Is this, did I unlock this? I did, my bad. Let me just go ahead and pull up another poll that he did. Because this particular topic has also been a hot topic of debate in video games as well. Now, I actually voted on this one because of course I did. I voted on this one because of course I did. So this one is, should lead video game characters be widely considered attractive / inspirational by the vast majority of players? Because again, it's the CEO of the studio that makes the Lords of the Fallen games. And as you can see so far, it's got 1 day left. And I imagine not as many people are going to vote in this one as they did in the previous one, because not a lot of people are seeing these polls in the first place. But so far, the results are unanimous in the idea that people would like to see attractive, aspirational video game characters in video games. Now, bear in mind, he did not specify which genders should be attractive or aspirational in video games, which makes this a broad question that applies to both genders. However, if you've been paying attention to media as a whole and video games as well, you'll find that it's only been one particular side of the aisle, or at least one particular gender, that is, for lack of a better way to describe it, gotten hit with the ugly stick. As somebody has clearly posted a picture here, kind of showcasing that in action, as you can see. The real models on the left versus the in-game models on the right for these particular characters. This is Kay Vess from Star Wars Outlaws. This is Mary Jane from Spider-Man 2. Aloy from Horizon. And Mara from Call of Duty 2019. As you can see, no matter how you slice it, you look at these images, it's not, it ain't lining up. It ain't lining up. So a lot of people have kind of gotten sick of seeing this shit. Because it does indeed seem to be happening on one side of the aisle. And for a while there, like before, this was like years ago before I started really diving into this shit. When I started noticing the push for one side of the aisle is when I went, when I was shopping online for clothes and I was in the men's section. And I noticed that all of the models they had for the men's section, they were all like conventionally attractive dudes, like what you would find in a model catalog for men for clothing that most women would find attractive. But then you go to the female section. And the female section, you got plus size, you got, unfortunately, you got, well, it depends how you look at it. You got trans women, you got plus size, you got women that are not that good looking as a whole. You got all kinds of bikinis for different kinds of women's sizes, so on and so forth. And it was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me you're willing to, the female side of this catalog is welcome to have all these various body types and plus size models and body positivity and all that stuff. But you don't extend that same privilege to the male side of things. The male side of things still has to be these dudes that are built, in shape, muscular, attractive. They still have to do that, but the female side doesn't. And that started waking me up to the whole idea of this thing being one-sided. Like I said, 3% of the whole world identifies under the trans umbrella by the ChatGPT. Yeah, it's like to make sweeping changes, like, and that's not to say that, you know, for trans people they shouldn't be considered for anything at all, but it is to say that when you're making these broad sweeping changes to satisfy a specific crowd that is not guaranteed to buy your product in the first place, you can see why a lot of these products are failing and are not getting sales. You're making these broad sweeping changes for an audience that either A, doesn't exist, or B, if they do exist, they're so small that whatever type of profit you think you're going to get off of them, you're not going to get. Because there's no guarantee that people in the trans audience even care about your game in the first place. They're people just like the rest of us. They have things they like, they have things they don't like. And if they don't care about your game, they're not going to buy it. It doesn't matter if your game has top scars for your characters to represent trans people. It's like, do trans people really want to see top scars in their video games for characters? Do they want to be reminded of having to go through that surgery by seeing their character look like that all the time? Have you considered asking those questions? So yeah, we'll see how things go. But there's another part of this whole avenue that I take a little bit of umbrage with as well. Is that because you're seeing a lot of I would say a lot of developers. You're seeing maybe 2 or 3 developer studios that are asking questions like this and are kind of making changes on the inside. But there's a lot of people on the gamer side of things, myself included, that I see people saying that these changes means that we're quote unquote winning in the culture war. By winning, they're talking about the culture war as a whole. Like whether or not you agree with the culture war, whether or not you participate in the culture war, guess what? You're in the culture war, whether you care or not. Doesn't matter if you participate, you are in the culture war. If you buy video games, you're part of the culture war. Because I remember when I used to shop guy clothes was super boring. It was all the same. Yeah, that's what it is. Like I said, this stuff only extends to one side of the aisle. And for people that tend to preach about equality all the time and how they want things to be fair and equitable, I'm not seeing a whole lot of equality and fair and equitable. Especially if these things only apply to one side. So this idea of quote unquote winning. Now, I'm not going to sit here and disparage the whole idea of people liking the idea of getting some wins, because in regards to that, we have indeed gotten some wins for developers making these changes and asking questions like this, for example. I do think things like this should be celebrated. But the idea of taking these wins as a means to say that we are, quote unquote, winning in the culture war, I think is premature. Because you still have a lot of studios that are choosing to double down on this stuff without asking the opinions of gamers at all. And you even have a lot of people within these studios that are very vocal about the idea of how much they hate us, the gamers, the consumers, the people that puts money in their pockets. They're doubling down on this stuff now. Now, at the end of the day, that is going to show exactly how wrong they are when the sales of their games tank because of stuff like this. And they will end up suffering the price because of that. But that is when that happens. And it's also not guaranteed to happen. Let's say a Grand Theft Auto comes out, right? Grand Theft Auto 6 comes out, and it has a lot of this shit that people are pushing back against in the game. Do you think that is going to curb or hurt Grand Theft Auto sales? GTA is one of those cases of being too big to fail, no matter what they do. Even if people don't like it, because everyone's playing it and because it's GTA, it will be too big to fail. It's just wonderful strategy to make a bad decision and then blame your customers. Exactly. And there have been other developers out there that have come out and said that, like, yo, getting mad at your customers because your games are failing or ridiculing or belittling or name calling your customers, like, not a winning strategy. Don't be surprised when your games don't sell when you do that. No one is saying you have to like your customers, but to be vocal and out in the open about how much you hate them? I'm sorry, did you think that was going to win? Apparently you don't like it. Apparently you don't like money, evidently. And there's a lot of studios out there that are doing that. And that's unfortunate because in many cases, it's usually a handful of people within these studios that talk like this, that'll be vocal on social media saying things like this. And it ends up taking their games. But the people that wanted no part of this, that work in these studios, they're usually the ones that have to suffer the most. They're the ones that typically lose the jobs when the studio shuts down. You look at what happened. You look at what's happening with Bioware Edmonton right now. If the rumors are to be believed about that studio being shut down next month, then all the people inside, including the leakers that have been leaking this information to the content creators out there, their jobs are gone too. And let's say that this Corrine Busch does end up going to a different studio to work on another RPG. Do you think they're going to be over at that studio working as a remedial position? Artist? Of course not. They're going to get a lead position within whatever this new studio is. Like I said before, the gaming industry is the only place where people somehow manage to fail upward. And I've said this numerous times. Where the people who just want to make fun video games, they're the ones that suffer the most. There was a video from a content creator that I was watching last night in preparation for this podcast. And I kind of want to showcase that here. I wasn't sure if I was going to have time for that, but I'm going to make time for this because I do want to talk about this since I'm on this subject. Let me go over here to this real quick. I do want to talk about this now that I'm on this subject. Let's see. Where's that video at? Is it this one? Here we go. It's a content creator by the name of AccolonnTV. That is AccollonTV. And he's not like a huge YouTuber. He's an up-and-coming YouTuber. Has a pretty decent following, obviously bigger than mine, of course. But he had somebody from Ubisoft send him an email and reach out to him about what's going on at Ubisoft. So there's a part in this video that I think was very pertinent to what I was talking about in regards to the types of developers at a place like Ubisoft and the people that end up suffering the most when decisions like this get made. Let's see if this is the right one. Again, the guy's name is AccolonnTV. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description as well for those who want to, check him out as well. You can't hear it? All right, hold on. Let's see if I can fix the audio here for this. Hold on. Now, why is that not coming through on? Why is that not coming through on this? Hold on. We do it live, folks. Oh, that's why. Hold on. I'll fix that. That's why it's not coming through. All right, here we go. You guys should be able to hear it now.
Years is just no longer working. The idea was always to make the game as widely
Thanks for the heads up, Raikou. Appreciate
possible, trying to cover the largest possible market. And increasingly what they find is that games that are a lot more focused has commercial success. From their own research, what they have found is that casual gamers, the audience that most of these AAA studios are trying to sort of target, casual gamers only buy about 1.4 games a year. So trying to make games for the casual audience will almost never work because they only, and this is where it gets really funny, casual gamers only buy games when it is must-have games as deemed by expert gamers. Or
what's that? Say that again. Hold on. One more time for the people in the back.
Must-have will almost never work because they only, and this is where it gets really funny, casual gamers only buy games when it is must-have games as deemed by expert gamers. Or
there you go. So at least that answers that question, doesn't it? Casual gamers will only buy games that are deemed popular and worth buying by expert gamers. The hardcore variety, the ones who play games often, buys more than 1 to 3 games a year. Anyways, I'll continue. Let them continue.
Hardcore gamers. So making a game for the hardcore audience will automatically mean that a lot of casual gamers will also buy it. Whereas making a game for the more sort of general audience will almost always put off the hardcore gamer because hardcore gamers care about one thing and one thing only. Is this a must-have game, and what void does it actually fill? In other words, I am a gamer. I like this type of game. Is your game going to provide me with that? Now, here is where they actually find a very interesting problem. Your hardcore gamer is no longer uninformed. nor are the people driving hardcore game sales, YouTubers and Twitch streamers. From their research, what they have found is that people that make game reviews, people that drive purchase, or people that drive purchasing power, are experts in video games. They know how video games are made, at least surface level. They know enough to be incredibly knowledgeable on how games perform. They understand how to do reviews far better than what they used to. It's no longer just a case of reviewers sort of saying, oh, I really like this game. I mean, go watch any of Angry Joe's reviews on video games and you will find he goes balls deep, skills up. They don't just go on, oh, I just really.
And I've actually, which is, he's right about that for sure. That people tend to go really deep into their reviews in a way a typical reviewer at an Access Media website like your GameSpots and your IGNs don't necessarily do anymore. And if they do that, well, there's plenty of average people out there, average YouTubers out there that can do that as well, and perhaps even do it better because they're not on a time clock by a corporation to have that review out within a specific time frame to generate the maximum amount of clicks to generate ad revenue. And especially if you have a fan base that follows you and doesn't mind that if you put out a video a few days later, they know they're getting quality regardless. And he mentions that that people tend to follow them and they like the idea of people going deeper into the games. And it's funny because as I started doing this stuff myself, as a brand new YouTuber, I guess you can call it in that regard, the few videos that I have put up that goes into deep dives about games, I have received compliments in my comments from people saying that they appreciate how in-depth I go when I talk about the games that I'm talking about. Like sometimes as a creator, you do have to go into what people tend to call autistic detail when it comes to what's happening in the game, because some of that stuff is very important to mention when you're reviewing a game. And when you have the time to do that without someone breathing down your neck to get it down in a particular time frame, you have the ability to deep dive into these games, break down what's good, what's bad, why, and how they can change it. So that's why in a lot of cases, these content creators are getting way more attention than a lot of these Access Media sites are, which is why so many of them are shutting down or people are losing their jobs. You can see what happened at Kotaku. There's a lot of stuff that happened at IGN recently where a lot of staff got laid off over there as well. So yeah, like a lot of that stuff is dying out in favor of YouTubers and content creators. Now, there was something else in this video that I want to talk about as well. So to find that.
Quite a number of conversations. I'm sort of, applying a little bit of context and a little bit of nuance to the conversation, but it makes sense to me. Getting a bug fixed isn't all of that.
Oh, this is part where he talks about how it's difficult, how the developers at Ubisoft talks about how difficult it is to fix bugs because they have to go through so much red tape in the company before getting the bug noted to the higher ups, then to the developers to fix said bug, that it ultimately ends up never getting fixed. Talks about that as well.
And so they would rather just not do it. Therefore, make sure that you become a political activist is what I took from. I don't know how to do anything, no matter what developers.
I think this is it here.
And have found much better positions at companies that is absolute nightmare that is Ubisoft at the moment. So basically, the way developers at Ubisoft is classed, according to this insider, is you have the superstars. These are the best of the best. They're incredibly good at what they do, and they're often also very well known. Now, he says there's very few of these people left at Ubisoft. Most of them have already left and have found much better positions at companies that is a lot better positioned within the market. Then there's what he refers to as the good developers, but they don't have brands. They don't tweet, and he calls himself one of these developers. They make up a small portion of those developers that are still left at Ubisoft. The problem is, while they're good, they don't have names, so they can't get jobs anywhere else. And then the vast majority of developers is what he call dead weight. They don't know how to do anything. No matter what you give them, they're pretty much always doing it wrong. But what they're very good at is social change, pushing social change. So basically, if you can't do the job that you were hired for, make sure that you become a political activist, is what I took from that. He didn't even talk about the
Now, I'm glad he kind of mentions this because this gave me an idea to really think about what's going on at a place like Ubisoft and in the industry as a whole. There was always, over the past few months, when the layoffs were in full swing, there was this talk of bloat, quote unquote, in the industry as a whole, and how that bloat is hurting studios because it's costing them a lot of money. And when he talks about this idea of these studios hiring political activists that they're now calling dead weight within the studio because they're not good at their jobs, the only thing they're good at is pushing social change, which doesn't really matter all that much inside your video games. And even worse is that people don't really care that much about that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. They're still hiring these people for positions at these companies. So you have your DEI, your Sweet Baby Inc. consultants, so on and so forth. And it's like, that's that's good for them because they make all the money for doing practically nothing. And then when the games don't sell, because people either push back on them, they don't care, they don't like some of the political bullshit that's in the game doesn't sell, the studio tanks, well, who suffers? It's the no-name developers that are good at their jobs but don't have a brand for themselves. And it sucks for them, but because they don't have a brand for themselves, they don't have a name for themselves, it's harder for them to get hired at other companies when they do lose their jobs because there's nothing for them. The rock stars, which he said there are a few of them left within these companies, they can lose their job and then get hired somewhere else because they have more than just their accolades under their belt as well. But the good developers who are good at their jobs, but just don't have names, which makes up a strong portion of developers at these studios, they are the ones that get screwed over the most. But you keep ballooning these budgets out because you want these huge, grandiose games, like he said in the later part of the video, that are meant to appeal to a large demographic while having no focus. And don't lie and say that you haven't noticed a lot of Ubisoft games over the past 20 years that are extremely bloated, allowing you to do anything and everything, trying to cram everything into a single game while having very little focus. So when you keep making games like that appeals to no one because you're trying to appeal to everyone and failing at all of it, your game doesn't sell, the studio shuts down, and all these people lose their jobs. Not the ones that are trying to push social change. They'll keep getting hired because they'll keep lying to the studios, saying that there's an audience out there for said social political change when it doesn't exist. So they'll keep getting hired. While everybody else suffers. That's the problem. So when the idea of the AAA industry is dying in favor of AA and indie studios, yeah, it's legit. That is legit. And so long as they keep going down this route, that will continue to be the case. Assassin's Creed Shadows comes out in March. The amount of money they put into that game, they better hope to God that that game sells enough to make up for it. I'm not going to say that no one's going to buy that game because it's Assassin's Creed. And Assassin's Creed games tend to sell relatively well for the most part. Not world-changing amount of sales. People liked Assassin's Creed Valhalla when that came out. They liked Mirage. I don't think Mirage sold as well as Ubisoft hoped it did, but it sold well enough. It's Assassin's Creed. I imagine the same will probably happen with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but will it be enough is the question, because Ubisoft is hinging everything they have on the success of this game, and they are fucking it up at every turn. They've been fucking it up since the announcement. That studio is on dire straits right now, and if Shadows doesn't turn a profit, then Ubisoft will more likely end up going private, and they might end up being dissolved. Especially if Tencent comes in, which they are angling to do, and buys up everything. Tencent is just waiting for them to fuck this up. Like I said, people were finally starting to see it with the UB when Assassin's Creed Odyssey came out. People were saying this is too long and it's too much boring content. Exactly. In fact, I recall me and Vancy having a discussion about that a while back. Like I was playing it, she was playing it, and I'm just like, yo, this game has got way too much going on, and there's very little focus. And even worse, considering how grindy it was, where if you didn't buy the XP boost package, the microtransaction XP boost package, to level up faster, you had to grind your ass off in that game to get anywhere. And she says, yeah, Odyssey was the definition of bloated. Absolutely. Which is why between the two of them, I preferred Origins over Odyssey. Like, I see what they were trying to do with Odyssey. There were some good ideas there. But that game overall was completely bloated. And that is the common issue with a lot of Ubisoft games since then. They tried to get back to that, to its roots with Mirage, from what I heard. I still haven't played Mirage. I'll probably get to it at some point when it's a bit cheaper, because I did hear good things about it. They tried to get back to that with Mirage. But this could be a case of too little, too late. And if Shadows is more of that, oh, man. Like, it's bad enough you already got the controversy with Yasuke going on, right? That was already bad enough. But if the game has got too much bloat in it on top of that, and then you start putting all this social political messaging in it on top of all that too, you got a recipe for disaster waiting to happen, man. This is over a decade of activists lying to these studios, telling them that people care about shit that they actually don't care about. When the lies about the amount of female gamers out there that wanted to be seen and heard in video games started spouting about, even though there's plenty of research and evidence out there indicating that there aren't as many female gamers as these liars want you to believe. When people spread the lies about whether or not, you got to make sure that you include the trans community in the decisions of character customization. So you have to change the body types to body type A and B to make them feel included. Even though you start taking polls, at least social media polls in this case, that indicate that people don't care about that shit as much as you think they do. Like, there is a rot in the industry, an infection of this shit. And it's been going on for well over a decade. And like a cancer, where you don't usually see the symptoms outwardly, until it has metastasized so much that it's overtaken the entire body, I think that's where we're at right now. And usually when that happens, it's usually too late to do anything about it. A lot of these studios are so deeply rooted in this shit that if they were to try to course correct, the amount of time it would take for them to do so and the amount of money it would take for them to do so, it would be too late. So even if you woke up to the idea of the fact that you were lied to, good luck trying to get back on track. Do you have the time and the money to make that happen? Probably not. And even worse if you're trying to double down on that shit. Like, you got what's happening. See, I got some notes here about Square Enix recently, because Square Enix recently highlighted a bunch of new policy changes where now they're more than willing to start taking legal action against people that they say are, for the protection of their employees from harassment and threats and doxing, which when you hear that, you think, oh, well, that sounds fine. Like, of course you want to protect your employees from people that are threatening their lives and their families' lives and stuff like that. That sounds fine on paper until you realize that their definitions of what counts as that is incredibly vague and nebulous. And the problem with that is that it opens the door for people to take advantage of that for nefarious means when you don't clearly define what these issues entail. To the point where if anybody offers any criticism that you don't like towards either your employees, your games, the developers behind them, you open the door to be able to silence them under the guise of harassment. And it's bad enough that Square Enix isn't doing all that well enough as it is. Like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and 16, sales weren't great for either of those games. So we'll see what's going on. 2025 is going to be very interesting. But at least some developers are waking up to the fact that they've been lied to. Or at the very least, if they don't believe it quite yet, they're willing to ask the people, the customers themselves, what they want to see. And for that, I do applaud them for doing that. Now, obviously, I am well over my time for today's episode. There were some other topics I wanted to get into, like the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 stuff that happened recently and the whole debacle around that with its community managers banning people for criticism and blah, 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 and how the game was just recently, the game has announced to be banned in Saudi Arabia because of a rumored gay sex scene in the game. Which apparently, for what the rumors say, is that it's unskippable on top of that. Now, from what I understand, a lot of people are leaning towards the idea of this being an intentional smear campaign against the game, because one of the, I believe the studio head, which I forget his name, I'll have to look it up again. He has been on the side of gamers since the first Gamergate. Like he was part of that back in 2014. He was on the side of gamers back then. So I would not be surprised if there is a nefarious group of people on the other side that are deliberately going out of their way to slam the game and to negatively affect its reputation because they don't like him. However, that being said, Saudi Arabia wouldn't just ban a game for no reason. And they sure as hell wouldn't lie about the fact that that content is in the game. And if you know anything about Saudi Arabia, they are not too keen on the idea of anything LGBTQ related in anything. There are laws against that shit over there. So they wouldn't have banned the game for nothing. When you look at what happened with Spider-Man 2 when that game released over there, Spider-Man 2, Insomniac had to remove all of the LGBTQ stuff from the game to sell a different version of Spider-Man 2 in Saudi Arabia. They had to remove all of that shit from the game. So I don't think they're lying about that at all. My thing is, if that's the case, I'm not necessarily against the idea of that being in the game, as long as it's a choice where you don't have to experience that if you don't want to. If it's a choice, that's cool. If it's mandatory and it's something you have to engage with, I could see that being a problem. There were some images that popped up about the game, because there was a cutscene in the game where Henry and Hans, they go into a lake for a bath. And there was someone who posted images of that particular scene with the subtitles. I think the subtitle with Henry Hans confessing his feelings towards Henry in the bath scene. But that was debunked because there is a video out there of that exact same cutscene where none of that dialogue is ever exchanged. At those exact same moments in which those screens were taken from, none of that dialogue is ever exchanged. So in a way, it does kind of feel like there is a bit of a smear campaign happening against the game right now. Now, I haven't played the first game, so I have no idea about the details of that. I am curious about it, though, and perhaps I'll get around to playing the first game since I have it for free on the Epic Game Store, because they gave it away for free on the Epic Game Store. So maybe I'll play it that way before I jump into the second one. I do want to play the second one, and I probably will when I get a chance to, but yeah. Something nefarious is going on behind the scenes. That being said, I imagine that there probably is some of that content in the game, which is why it was banned in Saudi Arabia, but it could be a case of this being blown out to be a bigger issue than it actually is. So, again, I can't get into too many details about that right now because I have limited time, but yeah, it is, we'll see. We'll see what happens. That one's kind of up in the air right now. But based on my notes I have right now, which is a lot of pages here, I should probably cut this show here now while I still have a chance to do so. Anyways. Like I said, all they got to do is add a skip button like they did in the first game. Done. Honestly, yeah, that will be fine. If they had a skip button where you don't have to see it, totally fine. Like again, I'm not against any of that shit being in the game. I can imagine, people having an issue with it when it's not skippable. So we'll see what happens. I'm not saying people are wrong for being upset about this, because especially now when you consider how much of this shit is in a lot of entertainment these days and the baggage that it tends to come with. If it was just a gay scene that was skippable and there was nothing else related to that in the game whatsoever, especially in regards to pushing woke politics, then I can imagine that being passed over like it's not that big of a deal. But if it comes with a bunch of extra baggage on top of that, then that's going to be an issue. We'll see what happens. But as of right now, there is some of this stuff bubbling up behind the scenes about that game. So I'm not here to say people are wrong one way or the other, because there's just not enough information out there to declare one way or the other until the game comes out. I believe it's out sometime next month, so we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's all I got for now, guys. Thank you all for listening and putting up with my ramblings in today's episode. Like I said, there was a lot to talk about today. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to get to all of it. Again, I might consider making these episodes longer in the future if I have the wherewithal to do so. But whatever, it is what it is. Anyways, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, let me know in the comments below or in the chat if you're watching it live or if you're watching it on YouTube. I'm always reading the comments. Again, these are just my takes on it. You might have a different take on some of these topics as well. So feel free to let me know in the comments what you think. I love reading the comments if you can. Also, yeah, if you want to catch these live, I do these on Saturdays around between 12 p.m. Central and 1 p.m. Central. Roughly around those times that I kind of started, around those times, usually throughout the weekends. If I get around to it and people do like these episodes, perhaps I'll consider doing them bi-weekly. And if not bi-weekly, then maybe daily. We'll see what happens. I do want to get to a point where I start uploading daily content in regards to topics in the future. The only reason I haven't gotten around to doing that yet, because I know I've said that before, the reason why I haven't gotten around to doing that yet is trying to figure out the format in which to do that. One of the harder things about doing content creation is figuring out a format you want to do and stick with. But I might just have to put something out there and see what sticks. We'll see what happens. Anyways, that's all I got for now, guys. Once again, I'm your host, Corrine Busch. Thank you all for listening/watching. This has been The Rundown, episode 10. I will see you guys next weekend. I'm out this bitch. Deuces. Also, before I go, like I said before, source links will be in the description section on the YouTube channel. So if you want to check out channels like AccolonnTV's or Smash JT's websites about this article or the tweets that I've posted as well, that stuff will all be, the sources to that will all be in the description below. So be sure to check that out if you're curious about all that stuff or if you want to read more about it. All right, anyways, I'm out of here, guys. Fade to black.